All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our Chapter 13 lecture over friends and family. So today we're going to summarize the development of social relationships throughout the lifespan, as well as summarize the evolution of family ties throughout the lifespan. So as usual, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything that's in the textbook, so we're just going to go over a couple things here or there, starting with friendship. So I'm sure you could think, to yourself about what your friendships were like when you were a young child compared to now, and some things that have changed. So, for example, with preschool, whenever you're in preschool age range, um, those years are marked by increased interactions with the world at large. So remember that between birth and about 2 to 3, most of your social interaction occurred within your family, or just by being within the same room with another infant without real social interaction. So you don't really have what we would consider friends until after 2 or 3 years old, because you don't have interaction with other infants at that time. So around 3, children develop real friendships. Relationships are based on companionship, play, and entertainment. They're mostly focused on doing things together. As they get older, they begin to care more about things like trust, support, and shared interests. Also, play is very important part. Is a very There are different types of play that you can see in your textbook, and basically the main idea I want you to get is that play contributes to social, cognitive, and physical development. So physical development is the easiest one, right? So obviously, when a child is playing, they're building muscle, they're exercising, so that helps the physical development in that way. It also helps to develop their motor skills because they're practicing different types of movements, whether big or small. Um, it helps with cognitive development when they do things like make-believe type play or they're building things. That is helping with their cognitive development. And then, of course, social development comes whenever they're interacting with other children. So they learn, what kind of behavior is appropriate. They learn how to share. They learn how to follow rules and play games with other people, and just how to be a person, essentially. So that is all starting in preschool when they play together. So that's why you see play being a big part of the preschool type, the preschool day. They spend a lot of time in play because that's actually really good for their development. Versus some parents think that in preschool children should be more focused on like learning their ABCs, learning how to read, those kinds of things. But whenever you focus too much on that and you don't allow the child time to play, you see that they don't get all those benefits that play offers. So really with preschool, like having that time, that free time to just play and learn, those kinds of things are really important for making a successful human, essentially. So that's preschool. So moving on to friendship in middle childhood. In middle childhood, the child is in elementary school, so this is a very important time for friendships. The child is spending more and more time away from their family, and they're looking for friends at school in order to feel part of a group. So this trend that you see is that as a child ages, they're spending more and more time away from the family. So friendships become more and more important. Friendships influence children's development in several ways. Friends provide information about the world and about other people. Friends provide emotional support and help kids handle stress. Friends teach children how to manage and control their emotions. Friends teach about communication with others. Friends foster intellectual growth and allow children to practice relationship skills. So some of these things are similar to what they were starting to learn in preschool, and now it's just getting more complex and in depth in their learning. But still at this time, even though we're seeing that friends become more influential, their influence does not become greater than the influence of parents and other family members at this time. So you're still, kind of following more along with what your parents and family want you to do, or how they act and talk and dress and those kinds of things, more than conforming to what your friends may do. So according to William Damon, children's friendships go through 3 stages. So stage 1 is ages 4 to 7, and this is where you base your friendship on others' behavior. So children see friends as like themselves. Children see friends as people they seek friends based on people who share toys, people who they can do different activities with, and they don't really take into account personal traits. So basically, at that age, again, 4 to 7, if another child always shares their toys, then you would consider that person your friend. You want to be friends with them and play with them. Compared to if you know that one child is always aggressive and doesn't share, then you wouldn't want to be that person's friend. Okay, stage 2 is ages 8 to 10. This is where you base friendships on trust. So children now begin to take others' personal qualities and traits into consideration. Friends are viewed in terms of the kinds of rewards they provide, and friendships are based on mutual trust. So this is middle childhood right here, is ages 8 to 10. So they start to care more about things like if they can trust someone, if it's a mutual friendship, so you're getting rewards out of that essentially. Um, so a reward could be anything from like having someone to talk to, having someone to um, keep you safe, like from bullies and stuff at school, those kinds of things. And then the last stage, stage 3, is from ages 11 to 15. This is where you base friendships on psychological closeness. So friendships become based on intimacy and loyalty, and friendships involve psychological closeness, mutual disclosure, and exclusivity. This is more adolescence age, so you start to share, secrets and stuff like that. And so that becomes more important, rather than just basing it on if someone is nice, but you have nothing in common, that kind of thing. Okay, and then moving over to gender differences now. So we've talked about this a little bit in our last chapter, where we know that avoidance of the opposite sex becomes very pronounced during middle childhood. And so again, we have that gender separation, girls play with girls, boys play with boys. Children's friendship most entirely sex segregated, and this sex segregation in friendships is seen in nearly all societies. So pretty much everywhere around the world, no matter what culture it is, you likely see this, where girls play with girls and boys play with boys. When the sexes do interact, this is called border work. It is often romantic and helps emphasize the clear boundaries between the sexes. So what that means, again, the term border work means that whenever in this stage um, boys and girls do interact with each other, it typically has romantic overtones to it. So like they might be dating, with air quotes around it or something like that. So you do see some differences in the nature of the friendships between boys and girls. So with boys, they tend to have larger networks of friends than girls do. A large group. And girls also have, with their friends, the one or two best friends, they have relatively equal social status. Whereas with boys, they have a strict dominance hierarchy, which is composed of rankings that represent the relative social power of those in the group hierarchy. So with boys, they have a larger group of friends, and they do not all have the same status. So you have one who is at the top of the food chain, essentially, that's the leader, and then you fall in line behind him. So boys attempt to maintain and improve their status in the hierarchy, which makes for a style of play known as restrictive play, wherein interactions are interrupted when status is challenged. Conflicts among girls, in contrast, are solved by compromise, ignoring the situation, or giving in. Girls, however, can be confrontational with other girls who are not their friends, or confrontational with boys. Girls' language is less confrontational and direct than boys. Okay, so moving on to friendship and adolescence. So again, we see that peers and group membership is becoming even more important at this age. Um, there's a couple reasons for this. Groups and peer relationships satisfy personal interests and provide the adolescent with information. Some groups provide prestige or power, or status. Peers provide opportunity for social comparison. Social comparison is where you compare yourself to other people to see how you're doing in life, essentially. So we talked about this before in our chapter 10, where if I get on Instagram and see that other people that I went to school with are married or having a baby, just got engaged, some typical things that happen around your age. you're going to look at that and then compare yourself to those people and say, okay, well, do I have those things? Do I not have those things? And then you're going to judge yourself based on that. And if you're doing well or if you're not doing well. So teenagers do that as well, by comparing themselves to their peers. Your textbook also talks about a little more about cliques and crowds specifically. Adolescents are usually part of some kind of identifiable group, and I'm sure you guys know what cliques and crowds are from your own experience with adolescents. So you might be a part of a group, let's say because you play soccer, so you're a part of that crowd, and then a clique would be a smaller part of that crowd. So maybe you play a specific position in soccer, so everyone who plays, that kind of position is in a smaller clique inside of that larger soccer playing crowd, essentially. One of the consequences of the increasing cognitive sophistication of adolescents is the ability to group others in more discriminating ways, which can lead to, discrimination issues and use of stereotypes that can be hurtful. Popularity and social status matters. Rejected kids may have emotional problems. So we know that being a part of a group, being popular tends to be important at this age. Not all children are accepted. Rejected children do tend to have emotional problems. And it's kind of like a two-way street. Like they may have emotional problems, which is why they were rejected by their peers, which then leads to more emotional problems. Your textbook goes over a study that was done where they ranked, children from, children who are really well liked and popular versus children who are rejected or neglected. And you have an assignment over that, so you should definitely read that part in your textbook. But essentially, with rejected kids, those are kids who are typically rated as not liked at all. And with neglected kids, those kids are ones that are just kind of forgotten about. So they tend to be like shy children that it's not that anyone necessarily dislikes them, but they're not ranked as like being really well liked either. So they're essentially forgotten about. Whereas with rejected kids, people really do not like them. And then the more popular kids are often ranked as being really well liked. And then you have controversial kids who are really well liked by some people and really disliked by some people. Okay, so with the puberty note, this is going back to talking about the gender relations. So before puberty, we still see the separation of the sexes. With puberty, there is hormonal and social pressure to interact, and eventually, most adolescents are in mixed sex cliques. So with the onset of puberty, you start to see more interaction with the other sexes, and you start to see cliques that have both boys and girls instead of only girls or only boys. At the end of adolescence, cliques become less powerful and male-female relationships become the focus. So you start to just focus more on dating, essentially, than on having a large group of friends. Okay, and then just a quick note on the social media. Adolescents are increasingly becoming involved with online social networks as these systems, as these systems provide new ways to interact with existing acquaintances and make new friends. Using virtual social networks, they can make contact with people they know in real life or total strangers. It's too early to tell whether web-based social networks will augment or replace more traditional forms of peer relationships. So, when we have this discussion in a face-to-face class, some people think that using technology to talk to your friends or to make online friends is a great replacement for in-person interaction. You lose a lot of the interaction that you have face to face when you're talking just over text. So we know that learning how to interact with humans is really important from a young age, and there's so much that you learn as far as how to read body language, how to read facial expressions, tone of voice, all those kinds of things you lose whenever you talk to someone just online. So it may not be the same as talking to people in person. Okay, and now friendships and adulthood. So how do we choose friends? So most people form friendships with others who live nearby, who are close to them. It's easier to get the rewards of friendship if people live nearby. So for example, I rarely see my friends that live in Dallas because I live in Fort Worth. And neither of us really want to make that drive, but like often as much as we used to see each other when we were in school. So there's a difference there just based on how far away they are. And so think about, a reward from adult friendship might be if you're moving and you need friends to help you move. If I'm moving and I live in Fort Worth, someone that I'm friends with but lives in Dallas probably isn't going to drive all the way to Fort Worth just to help me move. So it makes it harder to reap the rewards of friendship if you don't live near someone. And that's just an example for here, but going back to our online discussion, if you have a friend who lives in a totally different state or a different country, it's really hard to get the rewards of friendship from that type of person. Also, similarity plays an important role because we are attracted to people who hold attitudes and values similar to ours. So typically you're going to choose friends just simply based on proximity, people who are around you most of the time, and people who are similar to you, who like the same things as you. The number of cross-race friendships dwindles by adolescence and continues throughout adulthood. So we typically see people who are friends with people from their same race. And we also choose friends on the basis of their personal quality. So we like people we can trust, people who are loyal, affectionate, supportive, and helpful. What are the functions of friendship in late adulthood? So social networks in later adulthood are just as enjoyable as in earlier years. Time spent with friends is often valued more highly in late adulthood than time spent with family. Why is that? Because friendships have an element of control that compensates for loss of control in other areas such as health. Friendships may be more flexible than family ties, and mutual support when a partner dies becomes really important. Also, a note on that, deaths of friends can be just as traumatic as other losses to close to the elderly, but older adults who have many friends are more likely to become involved with new friends. So social support is a really big function of friendship in adulthood. You're going through a lot of losses at that time, so having that friendship there to have social support is really important. Okay, so now moving on to talking about family relationships. So there's a lot going on in this section. Relationships in the family change as a child grows, and we know that from birth, a child is completely dependent on the caretaker for survival. And as we just discussed, throughout childhood, children start to become more and more independent from their caretakers and spend more and more time outside of the home. And adolescence, relationships with the parents may become strained. The adolescent is questioning things more often and trying to develop an identity, which can cause some issues and fights between parents and children. And then on the parent side, there are other issues to consider, such as if they should have children or not. There are many reasons to have kids, but more and more people are not having kids or having less children than in the past. This is due to financial reasons. Women are focusing on careers more, and contraceptive use has led to less children as well. Of course, some people have children unplanned, which can also cause stress, and this is more typical of young people and minorities as well to have unplanned pregnancies. If a couple does decide to have children, this leads to changes in their relationship as well. It adds stress in many ways and can strain the couple's relationship. Once the child is ready to leave the home and go out on their own, this leads to challenges. For many couples, a major transition in middle adulthood is the empty nest syndrome. The empty nest syndrome is the experience that relates to parents' feelings of unhappiness, worry, loneliness, and depression resulting from their children's departure from the home. Although this challenge is harder for many stay-at-home moms to face than working moms, the nest syndrome is more myth than reality. The feelings are temporary in most cases, so they're not. It's not like the parents feel like this forever. It's a temporary feeling. And there are many benefits when children leave the home. So parents can work harder or work more. Adults have more time alone or to focus on other activities. So you can go back to hobby maybe you had before you had kids. You can spend more time together. The house stays cleaner and there may be less noise around, less chaos, those kinds of things. Most of the research on this has focused on women. Recent work suggests that fathers also experience a loss when children depart, though their responses may be different from those of their spouses. So fathers tend to report regret over not spending as much time with their children as they could have. For most parents, this period of sadness passes and they let their child live an independent. However, for a few, these feelings of sadness lead them to become helicopter parents, which makes them get very involved in their child's college or work. So this is where a helicopter parent in this case would be if your parent was emailing me asking about your grade or an assignment that you did, that kind of thing. That is not normal behavior, because you all are college students, you're all adults. That's why we're not, as professors, allowed to give that kind of information out to anyone but you. So that's not normal. So most parents don't do that. And with work too, you might see that parents might send out a child's resume to different places without asking them, which again is not normal behavior. So that typically doesn't happen, but can happen if the feelings from the empty nest syndrome don't fade away. Okay, so next on our list is boomerang children. So boomerang children are children who return home to live with their middle-aged parents. So they went to college, and then they graduated, but because of the economy, they couldn't find a job, so they had to move back home with their parents. Or maybe they got married, they moved out, but then they got divorced. They came back home to live with their parents. Maybe they got a job, but then times just got really tough, so they had to they couldn't afford rent, so they had to come live back home with their parents. But the key is that they left home for some period of time and now they've come back. There's been a significant increase in the US in the number of adults who return after leaving home to live in the homes of their middle-aged parents. Um, Men are more likely to return to the parental home than women. So I already listed some reasons that they might return home. Again, your textbook lists unable to find a job, difficulty making ends meet, people are marrying at later ages, or the breakup of a marriage. For the most part, this is a positive experience. So I know that this is kind of looked down upon, as if it's a bad thing to move back in with your parents. But our economy right now just it makes it so hard for young adults to really support themselves on their own. You know, you go to college so that you can get a good job so that you can afford to live on your own, but you end up racking up so much debt that you can't do it, and there's not a lot of jobs out there that will pay you what it takes to live on your own. And this tends to be a positive experience for the parents as well, in that they get to spend more time with their child. Their relationships have changed, so it's less of a parental relationship and more of closer to a friendship where you can have a more of a positive relationship than you had in the past. There's also maybe getting rent out of you, so that may help them financially as well. Just help them around the house, that kind of thing. Okay, and then the last tab is a sandwich generation. So another new trend in the middle-aged couples is that middle-aged couples become the sandwich generation, which is adults who in middle adulthood must fulfill the needs of both their children and their aging parents. This is due to a new phenomena where couples are marrying and having children later, and parents are living longer. So this poses challenges for both the middle-aged adults and the older adults who are being taken care of. The role is difficult because of role reversal. Children are taking care of parents, and the parents are in a dependent role. This can lead to the parent resenting or resisting care from their child because they don't want to be a burden. The care of parents ranges from financial aid to having parents live in their home. You may just be helping them financially, or helping them around the house, or with daily activities, or having them live with you in your house. And most of this burden typically falls on the wife. So if this isn't making sense, basically what this is saying is that you're in middle-aged adulthood. So let's say you're 45. Let's say that you got married later in life. So people used to get married really young, right? So by like 20, you were married already. And now maybe you got married at 35, and you just now have two young children that are maybe like in elementary school. So you have your elementary school kids, you have your husband, and y'all both work full time. You have your kids in school. Okay, but now your parents are getting into older adulthood where they need more help. They can't really live independently anymore. So now they have, let's say your mom has moved in with you, or you have to go to your mom's house every day to help her do grocery shopping or do some stuff around the house, that kind of thing. So what's happening is that you, as the middle age, the 45-year-old, are now having to take care of your children and having to take care of your elderly parents. So that's why it's called sandwich, because you're in between two generations, the younger generation, your younger generation, and then the older generation, your parents. So you can see how that could cause a lot of stress, because that's a lot to take on, especially if you work full time. You do see some cultural differences here. In collectivistic cultures, taking care of a family member is seen as traditional and not out of the ordinary, whereas in individualistic culture, in the US, we are an individualistic culture, it is seen as more of a burden. Lastly, there are some benefits to this, such as the growing relationship between you and your parents, or watching the relationship between your parents and your children grow, and you can strengthen relationships. So if you didn't have a good relationship with your parents in the past, maybe you can try to fix those relationships and have a better relationship now as you're an adult and you're taking care of them. Okay, so now let's talk about late adulthood. So this will be our last slide as well. So some changes in family relationships in late adulthood. The first one is becoming a grandparent. So just as with friendships in older adulthood, having family relationships is still important in older adulthood. Your textbook lists 3 different styles of grandparenting. So the first one is involved. Involved grandparents are actively engaged in grandparenting and have influence over their grandchildren's lives. So this would be a grandparent who takes care of their grandchild several days a week while the parent is at work. So in the example I just gave of the sandwich generation, maybe your parent lives with you and your children, so while you go to work, they take care of the children. That would be an involved grandparent. This is more common in grandmothers than in grandfathers. It's also more common in African American families than in white families. The next one is companionate grandparents, who are more relaxed and act as supporters and buddies to their grandchildren. So they probably don't live with you, and they might call often and talk to you and your kids, or they might go on vacations with you, but they're not involved in the everyday life of the child. And then the last is remote. So remote grandparents are detached and distant and show little interest in their grandchildren. Okay, next is retirement. So retirement is a big transition in adulthood. So a lot of people view retirement as a time where you slow down, you withdraw from your daily active lifestyle. Maybe you go sit on a beach somewhere or just sit in front of the TV all day. But in reality, there are a lot of different paths that people can take when they retire. Your textbook goes over 6 different pathways for retirement, but basically the gist is that some people, when they retire, they want to just slow down and maybe go back to hobbies that they had as a young adult, and not do too much else outside of that. Some people want to travel. Some people want to stay involved in the things that they were involved in as a middle adult. So it just depends on, there's no set way to, achieve maximum happiness or anything like that. It's just based on the individual and what makes them happy. Another note I have to make here is that retirement isn't necessarily easy. So it does take a psychological toll on you. So you need to be sure that you're psychologically prepared, as well as financially prepared for retirement. And that making sure that those 2 things are in place will lead to a successful retirement, no matter what you choose to do. Retirement is a time of slowing down and a big change in your life, so you need to be sure that you're ready for that. Also, you have to have money to live on, so financial preparedness is very important. You may not be able to retire if you don't have any money saved. So a lot of people run into that where they literally cannot afford to retire because they have no retirement money. So this might happen if you are someone who has only worked part-time jobs. Maybe you have 3 part-time jobs, but part-time jobs typically don't give you benefits, which means that you don't get retirement. You only get that here in the US, at least, if you're working full-time at a good company that gives you good benefits. So if you've been working, 3 part-time jobs your whole life, you don't have anything to retire on. Even if you are working in a full-time job that gives you retirement, you may not have enough by the time you reach 65 to comfortably retire. That money would probably run out really quickly, especially with the economy now and having to go to school in order to get a good job for a long period of time. You're missing out on lots of years where you could be saving for retirement. So at your age right now, you probably aren't thinking about this at all, but it's really important that you actually start saving now for retirement. You see that in late adulthood, people who were typically well off in young adulthood remain so in late adulthood, but those who were poor remain poor in late adulthood. These social inequalities become magnified with increasing age. So you tend to see that a lot of elderly people are living in poverty because they don't have enough money saved up. And even if they get Social Security, it's usually not enough to cover their daily needs. It doesn't keep up with inflation and cost of living. You also probably have higher health care bills at this age, and a fixed income like Social Security is not going to cover that. So that's something you should be thinking about now. But moving on to our last point with living arrangements. So contrary to the stereotype, only 5% of elderly people end their lives in a nursing home. 2/3 of people over the age of 65 live with other members of their families. And that includes that most of them actually still live with that most elderly people either live with their spouses or they live with another family member like their son or daughter, something like that. There are some options for living arrangements. 10% of people over 65 live in a continuing care facility, which is a community that offers an environment in which all the residents are of retirement age or older and need various levels of care. So as your level of care increases, your level of need for care increases, residents move into assisted living with support by medical providers as needed. Another option is called an adult daycare facility, where elderly individuals receive care only during the day but spend nights and weekends in their own homes or with family members. So this is a good option for that sandwich generation. If you have your parents living with you and you're trying to take care of your kids, you have to go to work, they need care during the day. You can take them to an adult daycare where they stay there during the day, and then you pick them up after work and they come home and stay the night with you. Some of these adult daycare facilities are also combined with infant and child care programs, which allow for interaction between the old and the young, which can have benefits for both um, populations. So the children get to interact with older adults, which they may not get to interact with on a daily basis. And the older adults find a lot of joy out of interacting with children, and it helps them with their motor skills and those kinds of things as well. The last type of nursing home I'm going to talk about is called a skilled nursing facility, which provides full-time nursing care for people who have chronic illnesses or who are recovering from a temporary medical condition. Okay, so that is all I have for you on this chapter. So you can now move on to doing the assignment.